Hi, Joyce.
Hi, Anne.
Do you remember last week when we were talking about trust? And then we were talking about the word lying. And I think you came up with some more thoughts about that. Do you want to share them with us?
Yeah, I did. I was thinking about the fact that little kids make believe. Um, I think make believe is different than pretend. You make yourself believe something. So you're acting out a certain part, you're playing a role. And for small children, anything is a whole event. They don't separate out emotions. They can't hold a lot of emotions and balance them. It becomes a complete event. So I think the fact that adoptees have to make believe a lot uh, puts us in a funny position. And then it's hard to discern the difference between lying and making believe. I also think it's true for all the parents involved that, it was Betty Jean Lifton who said there's an as if quality that was foisted upon people by professionals back in the day. And birth parents were supposed to believe that when they had their child placed for adoption, it was as if it never happened and they could get on with their lives. And for the adopting parents, it was as if this was the child they gave birth to and they could get on with their lives. And for the adoptee, it was as if this was your only family and you could get on with your life. And none of that was true. And over time, we see the trauma and the difficulty that all parties experience. And we see that making believe and acting as if really is a form of lying and lying to yourself. And it's not healthy. It doesn't really help you in the long run. So that was my little rambling after our talk. I thought about
But it
that.
doesn't feel like a rambling. That makes my heart feel, um, I'm going to say empty, but it's more like sucked out, like almost a panicky feeling. And I think that is, I mean, if you think about it, when you're like any age really, and you're adopted and you're with your family, your adoptive family, and you're feeling like you're part of the family, and then a thought comes in that you have another family, and then it can be like something just vacuumed out your insides because there you are feeling like you belong, and then all of a sudden once again feeling like you don't belong. And that's a really, and that statement, what you said is, it was as if it never happened. That could be the start of a fairy tale movie, right?
Mhm.
As if it never happened, and then some new story happened. That's, I mean, no wonder we struggle with trust. How can you struggle with trust? It's as if your life's your own. It's as if this is your family. And
And
your life is your own.
it doesn't leave any room to grieve for any of the parties
No.
because there is a loss that everyone experiences. And for many, many, many years, people, professionals, tried to focus on the upside. This is a great thing. You can get on with your life. You can get on with a family. You can get on, all that as if was supposed to fix everything. And what we learned is that it didn't. There's still a grieving process, a loss, an acknowledgement of what came before and then what happens after. And not to acknowledge that is really hurtful.
Yeah. And like how to grieve is so complicated because the grief is, I mean, there are people are in their lives doing their thing, and then they have this ocean of grief inside of them. And so there isn't an appropriate place that, for it to get expressed. And so how do you negotiate having that much grief in you? Unless if you don't have a therapist like you, or you don't have a community that also understands that grief.
Well, and I think it's really different for everyone. Not, and no one really is the same, and people have different pacing and different ways of dealing with grief. As long as we acknowledge the facts and hold space for people to do it at their own pace, I think many birth mothers, especially birth mothers, not birth fathers that I've worked with, spend time ignoring what happened and getting on with their life to get them. And that's in a trauma situation, getting back to what's regular for you is what gets you back on course. So that's not necessarily denial.
Mm,
That's just getting yourself back into movement.
mm,
But there should be space held to
mm,
come to a point where you can, grieve and realize what happened. And for the adoptive parents, I mean, this child doesn't replace a child they might have had that would have looked like them, that would have carried their ancestry. And no one wanted to say, everyone wanted to say, oh, we love you all the same if they had both birth children and adopted children. But no parent loves all of their children the same. Hopefully, they love all their children.
mm,
But each child you have a different relationship with. And
mm,
certainly, a child by adoption is more of a stranger to
mm,
you. So I think, and then for the adoptee, it's you grow. I mean, I want to pay attention to everyone's experience, but the centerpiece is the adoptee.
mm,
Because without the adoptee, we don't have adoption. We're not talking about the birth parent, first parent. We're not talking about the adopted parent. For the adoptee, if they're adopted at birth or soon after, it's really the foundational piece for them. And
mm,
if they're adopted at age 7 or 8 and they have an experience of their family of origin, it's a little bit different. There's still the grieving, there's still the loss, there's still the importance of, talking about what's happening. But I think it's complicated and we don't give it the right kind of attention.
mm. You know, thinking, and I just know a little bit about IFS, just having worked with Kathy McKechnie. And so I picture that there's, a part, or possibly even an exile, that's just this devastated baby that can't regulate its own feelings. So that gets buried in us. And so it's like we're these bodies that walk around with a like in real life. What if I was right now talking to you and I had a screaming baby in my hand and I was just ignoring the baby because I'm trying to focus on you? The baby's only going to stop crying because it gives up at this point if I'm not paying it attention. And it's not a healthy give up, right? It's an exhausted give up. And then later it will start crying again. And so in our previous conversation, we had talked about trusting things and people too soon and too much. I was thinking about it as too much, too soon, too fast with trust. And I'll make a circle and I hope the whole thing will come together. But for example, recently an adopted person wrote to me with massive heartbreak because she had not too long ago fallen in love and she was going to leave the country and change her life and go with this person. And before she left the country, he broke up with her. And, she was devastated. And I feel like I can think of so many examples in my past where I remember once, almost every time when I would have a breakup after even my first divorce, I quickly got in a new relationship after my first divorce. Quickly. And so instead of giving myself space to grieve the divorce, which would have led me to grieving the baby, I got a coping mechanism, which was like something bright to reach for, so I didn't have to go into grief. And that was a pattern that went on for quite a long time. And one time, a new boyfriend said to me, you know, it's not supposed to go like this. This is too fast. And I was so confused, you know, because I was thinking, this is exactly how it's supposed to go. This is so great. We're so attached. We're so bonded. And then he broke up with me because it was too weird. And another time I was dating someone, and early on he read You Don't Look Adopted, my book. And I think the first chapter is something about if you want to get a restraining order, date an adopted person. And I wrote, like, this is how it'll go if we date, you know, and I listed all the things that I would do. And the guy said, this is what's happening in our relationship. And I had to fall all over myself trying to prove to him, but this time it was different. And all of these things, I believe, you know, one time a friend who was a therapist, when someone had broken up with me, she said, go get into your bed, get in the fetal position, and think about your birth mother. And I said, it's not about my birth mother. This grief is about this guy. I'm devastated. And she said, just do it. And I said, no, it's not about my birth mother. And she said, just do it. And so I did it, and I got in the fetal position. And I thought about her, and I just lost it. Just cried and cried and cried. And that, I wish I had known you then, because it's one thing to have it start being expressed, but that grief is so monumental that if you don't have someone that you can show it to, who can help you make it into a container or some explanation or some hope that there's an end to it, I think I quickly just looked for another relationship to stem it, because I didn't understand it. Does that resonate with you at all?
You know, I think it's very unfair to everyone in adoption, the way that it's done. I'm totally against the way adoptions are done. And there are very good people trying to do their best in some instances. There are terrible people doing devastating things in some instances. But the whole structure of adoption as it became in around the 1930s is a business, and it's done not in the best interest of the child or of any of the adults. And so the whole gestation period, the first mother, birth mother, mother who's carrying the child, isn't supposed to think about that child because she's not going to keep it and raise it. And so whoever's counseling or supporting her, whoever her parents are and their guilt and shame, whoever her pastor is, whoever her, agency is, they're not really thinking about helping her to connect to this baby. And what I always tell birth mothers, first mothers, if I can meet them during that period, is you're the only mother of that child until it's born. And if you make another decision and it's really your decision, that's your decision. But for now, you're all that baby has. And so it's really important that you connect and that you think about it. One of the things that we're taught too is if you don't really care too much, it won't hurt.
Mm.
So there's a way that distancing themselves from that baby is a good way not to get too connected or not to feel too hurt, because you're not going to be able to deal with it in the end. And then the adopting parents are given no help to be prepared. They're just these people, for the most part, standing in line waiting to start a family. And this is the way they've tried some other ways, and now they're going to do this. And their vision of having a child is, cozy and cuddly and wonderful. And they're not given any help to understand that the child you're going to get is in a crisis. The child you're going to get is grieving. The child you're going to get may be in shock, may have flown across the world and may be in complete shock. And it's not going to be cozy and comfy and wonderful. And I think a lot of the adoptive parents that I've worked with feel rejected by the baby because that baby can't snuggle and be loving. They're still grieving. I think that's one of the reasons they used to place us in foster homes for 6 months or so that we didn't get connected. This is so crazy thinking, and finally we understood it. But what people used to do was place children for a number of months, and the foster parents weren't supposed to attach or connect in any way. They were just supposed to take care of them, or the orphanage, or whoever, so that by the time they got to the adopted parents, they'd be much more available and they would have gone through their grieving. But what about the next grieving? They get used to whatever they're in, even if it's not good. It becomes familiar. So all of this makes it really hard. And then you have this baby who is, really trying to make sense of the world. And there's nobody helping them to do it because the adults aren't getting any help. It's a disaster. It really is. It's amazing how many people turn out pretty good. How many parents, both birth and adopted, and how many adoptees. And then there are tragic cases. But even if we're only looking at the high functioning situations, there's still, it's still done so poorly without any real cognizance of the loss, of the trauma, of the disconnection.
What you said about it's a baby trying to make sense of the world. I was thinking about the word overwhelm. Like you described a whole bunch of people that are in some state of overwhelm, the birth mother or the first mother and the adoptive parents and the baby. Recently I went to buy a car, and it's the worst feeling walking out of a car dealer when you realize you handed trust over to this person who then just opened your wallet and took out all your money. And this is a common occurrence for me when I'm in the position of I need to evaluate, either a prospective date or but I don't do that anymore, but anything. Even at the candy counter, right? You're going to evaluate which thing to pick, or you're looking at which job to choose, and you have to evaluate. And I'm learning in ACT therapy that there's this one way of looking at your thoughts is to imagine that you're standing over a train track, and that the train has 3 sections, and one section is your thoughts, one section is your feelings, and one section is your reactions. And so the idea is to observe yourself and to observe these things, and so to know that you're separate from them. But as I was doing that, I realized, like, oh, those things happen to me so fast and in such a great amount. I am watching a chaos train go by, so I can't even separate the 3 things. So all I see is chaos. So and I think maybe I don't know much about, well, anything about executive function, but I feel like maybe that's what we're talking about, that I can't reliably evaluate a situation, so I just try to get through it. And so again and again and again, the easiest way to do it is just to hand over trust, just to get through it, because I can't get a grip on the situation.
Well, that's what you have to do. That's what that baby has to do. If that baby isn't going to be failure to thrive, it has to immediately gear up and connect somehow. And, so it's not surprising that many adoptees overtrust. And I don't think they really overtrust deep down.
Yeah, a lot of times they undertrust, right? It's like it's a fake trust.
Right, but I think they have to make a quick choice
Mhm,
to not be abandoned.
mhm,
So the quick choice looks like overtrust.
mhm,
And the fantasy, the person you said who wrote to you and said that she thought she was going to be moving with her boyfriend and then he cut it off. That's a lot of make believe too. She
Mhm.
was making believe that this was going to be her permanent placement.
Mhm.
And that wasn't his reality necessarily.
Mhm.
So reality checks are really important for adoptees because the idea of reality is a little screwy.
You know, what if we end with this thought? I want to say something and then see what you have to say, and then we'll pick it up again next week. But what I'm learning about myself, the next time I go into a car dealer, I have to slow everything down. And this goes for everything. I have to slow things down so that I have space in order to think. And that is incredibly empowering because it's saying, I'm a real person. You don't control me. I am gonna, I am part of this relationship and I need a lot of time because, and so I think it's also getting used to, I think slowing down can feel agonizing when you're afraid the thing is going to disappear. And so one, like being quick, like if at least you got it, but I think there's something so real. And I would love to talk about this more next week about going slowly as an adopted person and giving yourself space as an adopted person in order to make decisions that feel good for yourself.
And it's a really hard thing to do because what gets misdiagnosed often as ADD or ADHD is really post-traumatic stress.
Mhm.
And I think all adoptees come with post-traumatic stress and loss. And it manifests itself in a bit of ADD-ish behavior, lack of focus, and a jumping from one thing to another. Um, and I think that's exactly what you're talking about. So it makes it difficult to really focus and to think about what you're doing, and things may disappear, but it's nice to have the belief that if they do, they weren't right for you, or they'll come back another time. I mean, and a car is a good example. You can go to a different dealer. They can call around and find the one you want. It's not a matter. They may make you feel there's an urgency, but you can take an overnight and think about it and picture yourself in that car and think about whether the amount of money fits your budget and all the things one has to do. And then you have to take into account that you're treated differently as a woman, still, and more so lately. Uh,
Yeah, and actually, you know what? I had gone to a dealership and I was really proud of myself because they they gave me the car for 24 hours and I came back after an hour. And it was so hard to say this isn't the right car and walk out. But and in the future, I won't go directly to another car dealer. I'll give myself a few days to recover so that I can have that much energy to be there. But yes, 100%.
but I think that's a great example of finding something concrete.
Mhm.
Relationships are more complicated, definitely, but figuring out something that you want and
Mhm.
something that you're thinking of getting, and really doing a whole number of reality checks and reflections
To
on.
go to a clothing store, go to a restaurant, right? And really take the time to figure out what feels good and be able to walk out without getting anything.
I once had visitors from Australia who were doing some adoption research, and they were in the United States on a Churchill Fellowship. And they stayed with me for a little while. And we went out to dinner one night, and they said, this was way back in the early 80s or the late 70s, I don't know. But they looked at the menu, and the first thing on the menu was a choice of 8 different salads, and then a choice of 16 different salad dressings. And then, and it went on and on and on. And they said, how do you do this? It's so crazy making there's so many decisions that you have to make every hour on the hour. And I said, if I come to this restaurant, I know what I'm going to have, and I order the same thing every time, so it doesn't really bother me. But I do see what you're saying. It's, that is what it goes on. And it's true of a lot of things in this country and in this world. And it makes us crazier.
That's so true, because you only have so much. Yeah, so it's helpful to plan ahead.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can do that now. You can Google the menu and figure out what you're going to have, or, and not
I
go
would
crazy in the moment.
I would love to pick this apart next week and to really go slowly with slowly,
Mhm.
uh, um, and see what comes up. Does that sound good?
Sounds fine.
Okay. Thank you for this time, Joyce. This is special for me.
Thank you, Anne. See you next week.
Okay, see you next week.